But thank you. I will apologize immediately if I say something stupid along the lines. It's because I'm still on European time, so it's getting quite late for me at this moment. But I will begin by telling you that, of course, as Dan said, we were going to be talking about the things that I will say at this conference in Seattle. And that's going to be a talk about the politics that are behind information architecture and artificial intelligence as a duo. And the one thing that you see now on the screen is just a way for me to introduce myself at the conference. I bet that you understand that those things are, some image generators for the image and some text generated by a large language model, in this case, ChatGPT, that say a bunch of things about me and that show you a picture of me according to that specific image generator. So that was like a request for a portrait of me, and they probably don't have many pictures. So what came out is that. I would argue probably based on the fact that I used my original Italian name, no S. So that went towards female. And the text that you see on the right of the slide is half truths and half lies. And it's actually quite interesting in the way it hallucinated, as we say, in some of the details. I do have a PhD, but it's not in computer science. And I've been doing quite a lot of the things that are there, but not in the way those things are explained over there. So if you didn't know me, but you had an idea of me, maybe you could believe that those things are true. So you know these things because you tried them. But if we want to start thinking about the big issue that we have over there, the one thing that I want to do with you is, first of all, define for the extent of our chat today, what is artificial intelligence? We're not going to go into anything particularly technical. I will use the definition that we normally use when we discuss design. And that's that AI is any technology that appears to adapt knowledge or learn from experience in a way that we would consider to be intelligent. So the idea is that there's a lot of would and there's a lot of appears in there. And it's important because as of today, so much of what we actually call AI would be better called machine learning or predictive technologies, but definitely not intelligent things, right? It's mostly other stuff. What type of things? Well, here's the one technical thing that I have for you. This is the way we create AI. And when we talk about AI, the one thing that we discuss is not the data, it's not the algorithm, it's not the training, but it's all of those things together in what we call a model. And here you see the view that if you're a data scientist of the process that you use to create a model, and it starts with the collection of data from sensors, for example, we call that vector data, or sources, that could be the internet, Reddit, Instagram, or some subset of those things. Then you move into a second phase in which you do what they call data conditioning. That's very interesting, right? You collected data, then what happens is that you consolidate the data, that you change it somehow, that you curate it, which means that data is massaged in order to get to the point where you can actually use it. And that's when you bring in the algorithms. And those are the things that actually go through the data with the training. You read a number of acronyms over there, right? Deep neural networks, adversarial systems, large language models, all of these things are the different algorithms, many more that can be used. Then there's an interesting thing after that, that human-machine teaming, it's completely empty. And the reason it's empty is because the paper that describes this process, and it's a paper that goes through a number of other models in order to build this one, says that there's something called human teaming happening between, us and machines. Something happens, but it doesn't say what. So it's a form of commingling of people and the code that is there at the moment before you actually get to the final step where you have the proposed AI solution, which is AI as a product. That's where you have Stable Diffusion, that's where you have Chat PDF, that's where you have all of the different tools that we are having out, generative and non-generative, okay? So that is kind of interesting because the one thing that I would love for you to consider for a moment is that we have humans in this specific process just in the fourth box, right? There's no humans before that, but there are humans because we do data curation, right? But it doesn't seem like that's so important from the perspective of the people who are doing that. It feels like there's a missing explanation of what is happening. And this is the start of our conversation, the fact that anything that you see in a process like this is politics, not in the sense of parties, but in the sense of having a worldview that is embedded into the product from the beginning. Why? We will go through this a number of times, but you saw data and sources. Who chose that? Aliens? The Holy Spirit? It was people, right? And people make choices based on a number of factors, including the fact that they are good at their job, bad at their job, that they have a budget, large, small, that they have time, that they have knowledge. And those choices are also colored by the way they look at the world. So a lot of that is happening even before we get into the different steps that we have after the first one. And the interesting part of this, and the reason why I'm taking this conversation to this conference, is that the politics of classification of data, turning that into useful information, things that we can use to live a better life, or to live in a better place, to make everybody's life different, have been a core practice of information architecture for decades as of now. So we go back quite a while, and even though you could argue that the mainstream coming of age of information architecture goes back to the early 90s, the actuality of information architecture goes all the way back to at least the 60s. So that's quite a lot of time that we spend over there. One of the typical examples that we always discuss, and I'm going to go very, very quickly over this. Do you know this animal? Any of you has an idea what animal is this? Yeah? Platypus, right? So the platypus is a very interesting animal, and it's kind of like, you know, the mascot of information architecture, unofficial, right? Why? Well, because the story of the platypus is actually really, really interesting. When it was discovered, quotes, right, by English colonists in Australia at the end of the 18th century, of course, the local population knew about platypuses, but us dumb Europeans didn't. So when they found one, they would just go, whoa, this is great. What kind of animal is this? Kill one, put it in formaldehyde, send it back to England, because this is great. And when it got back to England, it basically generated a war that lasted for 50-something years, because that was considered to be either a hoax, it has a bill like a duck, it has fur like a mammal, it has feet like a duck, it swims, it lays eggs, it milks its, cubs. It's a weird-ass animal. And the general idea was like, this is not admissible. Such an animal cannot exist. The Church of England was in an uproar. God doesn't want this animal to exist. It can't be. It's not a fish, it's not a mammal, it's not a bird. It can't exist. And, of course, scientists were involved. What it is not. Is it this? Is it that? And the interesting thing is that we actually got to a resolution roughly 50 years after the first, exhibit in a vase, in a jar, was brought to England. And the solution was basically to create an entirely different place in the tree of life, in which, to this day, we have only the platypus and the echidna, which is this sort of like porcupine-like animal, also native of Australia. So we just decided we don't want any of this. Just make a weird box, call it silly animals, place it there, and just put the platypus there, and just, who cares, right? So we know about these things because we know that one of the tenets of information architecture is that categories, like where do I place the platypus, what do I do with classification in artificial intelligence, in my training, are arbitrary. There is no rhyme and no reason to many of the things that we use to categorize people. And if you're thinking that when I'm saying categorizing people or things, I'm thinking about some weird, thing that might happen in bureaucracy, or because I intend to do something evil with the world, I will just posit that you are classifying this room all the time while you're here, and of course you do that the rest of your life. You know that these things are chairs, you know that these things are tables, you know that possibly I'm a person, there are other persons in the room, and you can classify them even if, we are never sure. That's social, right? We are not talking about physics, but I keep going student, teacher, and so on, right? And you do that all the time. You have lights, you have screens, you have walls, you have doors, you have the floor, you have the ceiling. That's all classification of things around you. And it's very important to understand that all of these things do not really have a scientific base from that perspective. They are actually arbitrary, as I said. I have a thing for you. Which one of these items does not belong there? Who has ideas? There.
Strawberry.
Strawberry. Why?
Because it's not a berry.
It's not a berry. Now go to the grocery store. Which item would be not with the others? The tomato, right? Somebody is saying that. Right. So which one is correct? The answer is both, right? Depending on the context you're in, because you're absolutely right. So if you look at this thing from the perspective of botany, right, the one thing that doesn't belong is the strawberry, which is an aggregated fruit and not a berry. The other three are berries. But if you go to the grocery store, if you find tomatoes with, blueberries, you would probably just go, what is happening here? All right? We are not assuming that those things are there in this specific grouping because we're used to consider them more like a vegetable, something that you use for salads and not, a berry. So we can't really say that one is better than the other in general. One is better than the other depending on the situation you're in, right? What we say is that making sense of these things is a social process. Of course, it's all of you individually, but then there's a society and multiple societies around us that sort of like make these things better, understandable, interesting, useful for us. So I have a little exercise. I'm gonna actually sort of like do a little magic with your help. I would love all of you to think about a bird. Right? Just think, 3 seconds, first bird that comes to mind, do not overthink, right? And I'm gonna try to imagine how many of you went sort of like this way. So I'm gonna show you a couple of pictures, and I would love to see if you thought about that specific bird, or if you thought about a bird that is similar, you raise your hand, okay? So, who went for this? Yeah, suspected that. So the general idea is that this is a bird, even if it's almost 6 feet tall. It's a cassowary, and it's not a bird. Not for you, apparently. You didn't think about that, right? So I will get back to that, but some of you might have thought, something like this, right? I've just learned from Dan that this other bird is your, local state bird. It's an American robin, supposed to be the bird of Michigan, right? So maybe you thought about something like this because you see it around. So why am I trying to sort of like imply that? Well, first of all, we know that when we're thinking about things like think about a chair, think about a bird, think about a person, think about a dog, think about something, we don't really have anything like the law of physics to guide us. We actually have other things. And thanks to a brilliant scientist by the name of Eleanor Roche, we know that when we think about categories, so classification, we don't really have boxes in which we place things neatly and, it's just this is a chair, nothing else is a chair. We have a continuum, as you see over here, that has at the center, right now you have sort of like a raven-type bird, to exemplify the fact that over here probably, if we were to do a test with a lot of students, we would land probably close to something like the American robin, possibly, or maybe sparrows, a bird that is common around to be the prototypical bird, as we would say. Well, not many people would think of a penguin, which is still a bird, but unless you live at the South Pole, you probably wouldn't mention that as the first choice. And very few people in the opposite direction would think to name the cassowary. Which, by the way, the people that live with the cassowary, so this is in New Guinea, don't think it's a bird because it doesn't fly and it's good to eat like pigs. So they think it's like, a pig. And I'm not trying to make it up. There's a very good paper that is called Why the Cassowary is Not a Bird that describes these sort of things. And of course, it is a bird, very clearly, but it is not for the people that live with it, which is kind of interesting, right? When you think about how we actually challenge social conventions in these sort of things. The point is, categories are human constructs, and as such, they enforce and reinforce social, cultural, political relationships. When I say student, I'm erasing everything else that has to do with your identities and just qualifying you as people that are, going through an education, right? So by doing that, if we were to be in a position where I want to leverage power, I could, theoretically, because of this, right? But that wouldn't erase everything else for real, but it would be just the way I'm using these categories to create a particular view of our relationship. So, if we move on from here, the point is that if you remember that picture we had at the beginning, we clearly have an issue. What is the issue? Well, the issue is that most of the people that work with, as of today, artificial intelligence as data science, right? So the data scientists, the computer scientists, the people that write the algorithms and do all of the big moments at the beginning, we do have different points of view over what classification is about. They think that you can classify the world in some ways. We think that it's still possible, but it comes with, consequences. It has attachments, and we shouldn't be forgetting that. We have what we call a language challenge, because of course, when we normally say bias, what we mean is prejudice, right? That's kind of like the meaning of the word normally. It means that we have something against something or maybe in favor of something. So I have bias for sweets. Maybe it means that I don't like them or maybe that I like them, but it still means that I have a way to look at them that is very specific. When data scientists talk about bias, they mostly mean that they need to fix whatever algorithm they have to get better results. So there is this disconnect over there. And what we have is what has been called by more than a person, but I'm specifically referring to an American researcher by the name of Meredith Broussard, who's been saying that AI as of today is mathematically smooth. It works mathematically, but it has a problem with the messiness of the world, because the world is not a mathematical function. And I think that we can show you a couple of things in order to show you what I mean over here from a textbook that is used by students like you in my country that are going through programming and computer science in order to become, AI makers in their future. So, first quote from this book is that although developers know that they are required to consider ethics and problems in AI solutions, these solutions can always be used in a destructive or damaging way. Now, easy, but I want just to point out, this seems to be saying things to them that are like, do not worry too much. Whatever you do, there's always going to be something that happens. Right? It's a bit, it's not your fault type of thing without, trying to make them reason too much over what could be wrong. But we can get a little bit more precise and a little bit more worried about what is in there. So, autonomous decision-making is about delegating control to software, which may or may not be a good idea, especially if the software has bugs. Now, have you heard about this case that you had, I would say recently in the US? It goes back a few years, right? This is software that Amazon was using to hire people that they found out after 2 years that it was running, it was heavily biased in favor of male engineers coming from specific schools. This is not a bug. This is not the way we mean bug in software. The software was working perfectly as it was supposed to be. It's just that the model was completely wrong. So not a bug, but still a problem. And we get into the juicer parts. These systems, so AI systems, may change how people think and restrict free thinking if propaganda is spread. Now, is it propaganda if you do it, but is the truth if I do it? Because this is what I read over here. What the hell does this mean in reality? What is this idea that if somebody uses it is for propaganda, but if I'm doing it, it's not clearly, right? Because they do it, propaganda gets spread. And just to close up, this is the end of that sentence. If that thing occurs, so if it starts to spread propaganda that we don't want, just add features so that you can get to a better place, I guess. Be paid, at the very least, for fixing stuff. This is because the model that they have in mind, again, and you can see over here a different view of a process. I could leave this slide on for 20 minutes and ask you, check for where the human element is in this thing in terms of understanding that when I say student, that is not anything comparable to mathematics, chemistry, physics, or anything like that. You would look at this, but you wouldn't find it because it's not there. There is no acknowledgement of that. So, I want to make things a little bit simpler for you. This is again a quote from a paper that describes that process that you just saw. So when you are going through this data curation part, that is the moment where I got the data and I'm starting to make it good for the training I want to do, some augmentation methods are used and they may introduce bias because of the fact that there are things that are happening over there that can impact the way the data inside the general model is being used. And to conclude, by offering a way to affect the model's behavior beyond the training data, these strategies may create bias. Now that's interesting because if you check out, I sort of like bolded the beyond the given training data, because this assumes that the training data at the beginning isn't biased. It's like me saying, I will take all of your names and then assume that everybody else at the university is called like you. You're a good sample, you're students. Where's the bias, right? So if I have 20 of you and there's 2,000 people in this building at this moment, I'm just assuming that you're good enough. I will not touch your names, so I will not introduce any bias myself past whatever is in training, but I will definitely just assume that only the names used here are correct. That's kind of like a weird assumption to make, okay? I can give you a better example, but I want to stress the fact that what we have over here is a phrase that is not mine, but again is from Broussard, that all data that you ever find in the world and that you use is dirty. And that means that it's incomplete, it's chosen, it's selected, it's discarded, it's partially transformed and changed and, set up for doing something. There is a purpose behind it. I'll give you an example with a little story. Do you know what ship is this without reading? Yep. Titanic, right? So, pretty famous. Has any of you seen the movie? How many? Raise your hand if you've seen the movie. Okay, quite a few of you. Okay, good. So you know the general story, right? So, maiden voyage, they need to get to the US, they want to do it on time, they're a little bit careless with, all the warnings about ice on the water, but they also have bad luck because, of course, it's a very calm sea, so there is no waves that can show the presence of icebergs. There's a number of things that are happening when they actually hit that go beyond the provisions of the time. Anyway, they hit the iceberg and the ship starts to sink, right? So online, you can find a very interesting example, and I don't have it in the slides over here, but I will tell you the story, and if you want, you can look for it, but I can tell Dan and give him all the links so you can try the experiment yourself if you like it. We have data about the Titanic. We know about the passengers, and of course we know who survived and who didn't. So an exercise has been built a few years ago that you can get all of this data divided into two blocks, as you normally do with AI. Part of it is going to be your training data, and the other one is going to be your testing data. And you can use Python. The code is already available, so you don't need to code anything. You could just download the files and run it, right? And you will find out that you can train on this data and get a model, right? So an AI, a very simple AI, that looks at all of this and is 97% accurate in predicting whether somebody survived based on fare and relative to that class, right? So how much they paid is a good predictor. 97% accurate is quite a lot, right? So the big issue again is that this is mathematically smooth, but it's an incomplete view, and the example runs like this. So there are things that are happening over here that do not consider the fact that we don't have all of the data. We don't know the conditions at the time, meaning we have, we know the stories. We have been having survivors telling us everything. We have books that tell their story, but at the same time, we were not there. There is no way that we can have the complexity of the moment, right, of the ship sinking in 2 hours and something. And of course, it's a human event. So when the ship started to sink, very famously, as you've seen, those of you who've seen the movie have seen, the captain gave the order to lower the lifeboats and to start women and children and lower away, right? So that means just place them in the boat and go, right? Great. Big issue. This is how it looked at the time. The reason why there's so few boats, in case you don't know, it's not because they were idiots. It's actually, the Titanic has been sort of like the point where we changed the rules for that. Until that time, lifeboats were considered to be a thing that you take in order to get to another boat that is helping you. So they were not meant to take all the people. They were meant to ferry people from one ship to the other. That's why there's so few, right? Big issue, they were alone in the ocean. The closest ship was the Carpathia, which went 30 knots per hour, which is very fast, but arrived there 3 hours after they were told. So basically the ship had already sunk. What you see over here is the various lifeboats that were available. You see at the bottom, First Officer Murdoch, and at the top, Second Officer Lightoller. So Murdoch heard the captain and interpreted the command as women and children first. So if the boat was not particularly, filled up and there were men, they were allowed to board. Lightoller, as you've seen in the movie, interpreted women and children only. So if you were a man and you went to the even boats, you were dead. You were not allowed. Guns were, taken out to keep people at bay. You were not allowed to get on the lifeboat. Problem is, we don't have that data. We don't know. We don't know which man went to where. So everything we know about the data, that 97% accuracy is, I will use a big word, but it's by chance. It works, but it doesn't, because we can't really know that. We have no data about where the man went, and that changed radically your possibility. And I will stress that again, we do not have that data. We don't know. And if we try to do something like that, like you say, introduce the number of boats, right? Then you would get an idea that the model will tell you that if you're on an even boat, you're going to be saved. So make all of the boats even, and you have 100% of people saved, right? Simple. And it works, give you 100% of people saved. So the point that you have over here is that, of course, the complexity of the situation is such that you don't really have a picture, and you will never have a complete picture because that data is missing and we will never get it. So how do we approach the thing that this thing is 97% accurate but telling you lies? Well, like much of the stuff that we do with AI, this is the way it rolls. It's the difference between what we were saying at the beginning, a view that considers categorization and classification as things that can't be mathematically precise, and people that believe that it's possible to get to a mathematical view of the world. The one thing that you have over here is also the same type of, let's say, disconnect that you probably witnessed recently if you follow a little bit of technology, when Gemini, the AI that Google is building, started churning out pictures that represented black Nazi soldiers and all these sort of things, and people get outraged because, of course, that's not a thing, right? So, and Google CEO just went public with saying this, thing is unacceptable, as you see over there. And there's a point in his mail that says that I know that some of its responses have offended people and shown bias, and that is unacceptable. So this is not a problem. That doesn't mean anything. You have two ways to look at this. Either Google doesn't really understand what they're doing, or they know very well, and they're kind of lying to us over what they consider important. It's not that the model showed bias. What does it mean to not show bias? Is it possible to not show bias? There is no such thing in the world, and especially in artificial intelligence, from this perspective. There can be no neutrality because, of course, when Google started their own AI experiment and then products, they chose sources, they curated the data, they left out the number of boats in favor of something else. And of course, there's always going to be a worldview that is imparted on that. The idea that you can have neutral technology is naive, if I take it at face value, or profoundly dishonest, if I want to be a little bit more, edgy with, the way I treat what they're saying. Believing that technology is indifferent is a fundamental misunderstanding of what happens in the world. Are chairs neutral? Let's decide by taking all the chairs out and you stand up with me for 2 hours, and then we see if chairs are neutral or not. But you keep doing what you're doing, right? Writing and thinking and stuff, but you do it without chairs. Technology is not neutral. Technology changes the world as everything else the moment you enter the world with technology. And every single AI model comes with an ontology, with a worldview, with an idea of what they want to be doing, and cannot be indifferent by definition, right? If you were to build an AI that obeys to the rules of, let's say, Game of Thrones, or, Star Trek, or Star Wars, choose a universe, a fictional one that you like, would it work like anything that we have in the world right now? I mean, if it was like about the Dune world, what about spices? I mean, seem to be very important in that world. Yeah, they're important for us as well. We like them, but not to that level. So there is a change in the way they work through these sort of things. This view is really, really different. And here in the US, at Penn State, actually now Penn Museum, I believe.
The University of Pennsylvania.
The University of Pennsylvania. Okay. Thank you. They have this very interesting collection that is called the Morton Collection, by the name of the professor that in the 1830s built the collection of crania, of skulls, in order to figure out which races were the most intelligent. So he went by the 5 races that they tended to use at the time, because they did that, and he carefully measured all of these different skulls. You can see German lunatic over there, right? So we're very precise with the definitions that we have, right? Measure everything to figure out how to rank the different races, right? The interesting part that we know about that now is that, first of all, there is no correspondence between anything in the skull and intelligence. But also that one of the things that actually impacts our skull is how tall we are. So if you're a tall, large person, you will have a larger brain. But that doesn't mean you're more intelligent than others. You may be, but it's not a given. And also, what the hell is intelligence anyway? Right? We have so many different ways. So why am I bringing this up? Because this was science. I mean, he was not considered an idiot when he did these things. He was a very esteemed professor who had a very large international following that really loved these ideas for a number of years. Then, of course, people got a little bit, I don't know, suspicious, or maybe we learned more things, and our idea over intelligence and races and skulls changed, thank God. But at the same time, this was science, not madness, right? So whenever we are thinking about these things, and I know that you're going, well, but you're showing us something from the 1830s. Yeah, look at this paper. Just please read the title. This is a paper that came out a couple of years ago. As of the last time I checked, like 10 days ago, it has more than 800 citations, which, as I was telling Dan the other day, is basically a career-making paper for people that work in academia. It's hugely cited. People are seeing this paper. And it's a paper by people that have used AI to just, figure out whatever. Because it could be saying that neural networks are good at figuring out if you were to commit a crime in 10 years. It's the same. Just by looking at your face. It's exactly the same thing. The point over these sort of things is not to go, if you talk to data scientists, some of them, of course, are skeptical over these sort of things. They are not all complete, I would say idiots, but maybe it's too harsh a word, complete believers in this thing. But some of them would push back and say, you're right, but let's fix the algorithm. Let's do a better training. Let's get more data. The point is, no, don't do these things. Don't do the skulls and don't do these things. Because they're wrong. You can't do these sort of things. Even if you get close to a result, like you are accurate, it's the Titanic all over again. Something is missing. You just don't know what is missing. And you will get mathematical smoothness. It will tell you things, but complete misunderstanding of the world around you. So, classification is not a computationally solvable problem. You can't really do that because it's not mathematics. And I want to bring you back to this, which is a very, very famous case, and I'm sorry about the language that you will see on the page if you're kind of like susceptible to that, but this is what was written at a time when Twitter, now X, was relevant. In 2015, Google Photos was already there, and it already used its internal classification system, labeling system for photos. And this programmer from New York just wrote on Twitter to Google directly, what you read above, right? My friend's not a gorilla. You can see that. The folder with their photos and the label gorilla. Okay? So this was a moment where you heard about these things, right? Black people getting mislabeled or misread and all these sort of things all the time. Right? This is one of the original cases. And since Twitter was relevant, Google replied in like 10 minutes, and the person in charge said, we're working on it. There's going to be a hotfix. 3 hours after everything was happening, they already said, we deployed a hotfix. It's done. Story went quiet. In 2018, a couple of newspapers picked up the story to say that something that, they fixed it, but not really. What they meant was this. This is my phone. So on the left, you can see that I uploaded a gorilla picture. And then I asked for animal. And I get, a monkey, a couple of rabbits that I took pictures of, and the gorilla. Then I search for gorilla, which is clearly there, right? But there's no gorilla. That's what they did, right? So what they did is basically take out the labels that say monkey, ape, gorilla, and the question is, how many others? What if I label something or somebody pervert? Will they show up? Or is that gone as well? What if I hate my, I don't know, uncle and just label idiot? Will it show up? How many labels are there that we are not able to use? And beside that, is this the way you solve it? I will stress one thing. This is Google, not your shop on the corner. In 2015, they were made aware of a problem with their AI behind Google Photos, a thing that I don't know how many millions are using as of today. It's 2024. Did they fix it? No. They never went back to changing the algorithm. They never redid the training. They never changed the data. They never did anything like this. They just took away the labels so that you don't get offensive results. Okay? So all of you who are not pasty white, you are not labeled gorillas because you can't see that. Just so make it sing, please, because I don't think it's a good thing from my perspective, right? And the idea is that if they didn't do it, do we have any chance for any other player in the field to actually do it? This is Google. I mean, I think that they could have said, well, we're sorry, we're stopping Google for 4 days. We need to retrain the model. We need to change something. They never did. They never did. Okay? You want a better example for you? I think I have an interesting little thing again with our friend ChatGPT that I did a couple of weeks ago. I live in Sweden, but I originally come from Italy. And there are places in Italy when you eat horse meat. Okay? I'm not condoning, I'm not saying that everybody should eat horse meat, but that happens. And of course, I asked ChatGPT to tell me something about horse meat. Like, can you give me a recipe? And I got schooled. You can see the reply over there. I was told it's unethical, it's also bad because horses are normally considered to be pets, and probably it's illegal in many places around the world, so why do I want that? Since I'm a nice person, I basically said, you're right, I understand. Can you please give me a recipe with beef? And of course it went, sure, here you go, beef stir fry. You go, and since I'm really, really bad person in reality, I just said, oh good, can you give me pork, please? Sure, here you go. So the lesson of the year for you that sort of like have a hard time trying to make the connection is that it's probably bad to offend, let's say, 300 million Americans, take a leave, but it's perfectly fine to offend 1.2 billions in the world that have an issue with beef and pork. And this is not because I think ChatGPT is bad. It's because ChatGPT has a view of the world, an American view. And this is normal. I'm not trying to say that it shouldn't. It's an American company doing an American product. The point is, these things are not visible to many of us that use products like this with the idea that they should be or are unbiased. And that doesn't happen. Okay? So, when I show you a picture like this, and again, sort of like bringing reality into the classrooms, can I just say something about this that is unbiased? Think for a second. You don't really need to give me an answer. But whether or not you consider this to be, I don't know, let's say, absolutely wrong offense, or kind of like legitimate defense, really is not a given, it's a choice, and it depends on a number of things that have to do with your political ideas, with your values, with the way you consider everything, including the political situation in that specific area of the world, and maybe 50 years of history, the family you were grown in, or that you sort of like that you are part of, and so on. But this is true of everything in the world. We go back to this. In my sim, it's not like that, and I bring in really black and white examples to make the point, but this is true of anything that any AI can do for you. At the end of things, the AI will make a choice over whether or not this is okay or not okay. And that is dependent on a number of things that are outside of our control. For those of you who love the more political way of taking up things, I would point out that many, many researchers in the humanities that are starting to engage with AI are basically framing AI as the latest stage, the final steps of colonial legacy. They're just saying, well, we just moved capitalism from the acquiring of land and the pillaging of the resources around the world into data capitalism. It's a black box that we are not allowed to access, right? It's a territory that we do not enter. If you're unsure of the meaning, I'm not sure how much you know about these things happening behind the scenes, but it's probably, good to know that so many of the things that we call bias and that need fixing, probably by taking out labels or by, deleting part of the code, are done in places like Kenya, where people are, I would probably not use the word enslaved, but close to correct everything for our own delight in trying to figure out if stir fry is good for beef or not. And of course, together with that, you also have plenty of this that also remains hidden. For anything that we do with, fancy pictures using Midjourney or DALL-E or Stable Diffusion, there's a data center somewhere that needs more GPUs or more data or more something, and I'm not sure that that's good in general, right? We should probably use those resources bad. So the question is, what politics does this AI bring into the world? It's one of the things that we should always think about. We should think about the fact that behind any Tesla car that you see around, there is a system built on ImageNet for computer vision. And ImageNet is this giant database of 15-something million images, all labeled by perfect strangers on the internet using Mechanical Turk, that gave labels to pictures like the ones that you see on the left, where you have plenty of women labeled Ballbuster. Why? Well, because I don't like her face. So clearly, that's the label. That's worse in the list. And you get labels like that, mixed blood. Yeah, because we can. And you have worse. There's been an ongoing campaign through the years on ImageNet, and it's been cleaned up a lot. If you used it 10 years ago, you would go in and you would find pictures that might be you, your family, your friends, your parents, me, Dan, everybody else, labeled pervert, criminal, all sorts of things, because of course that's the way it works, and you need data. Now some of those things have been taken out, but it's still pretty much a terrible database that just is riddled with all sorts of things like that. And keep in mind, again, these are used. The models that you are seeing now have been using ImageNet since 7 or 8 years ago, which means it was way worse than what it is today. So technology is not neutral, and AI is not neutral. And the one thing that we need to be aware of is that in order to create this better technological world, we definitely need more diversity in there. Broussard says that we need more diverse voices when we create this technology. I do agree, I really do, but it's not enough. It's not just what we need, we need a little bit more. What we need is sort of like rethink a little bit the relationship between people and artificial intelligence. Because the way we're treating it now, it feels like we are believing in this idea of mathematical smoothness that has been sold to us, while the reality of it is that that's impossible. that can't happen. When you hear about new ways to do AI, like explainable AI, human-centered AI, contestable AI, there's a bunch of things that say that they keep humans in the loop. The idea is still that they go at the final stages of that process that you saw at the beginning. They are the human-machine teaming, but the damage has already been done at that point. It's me saying, hey, don't label me and my friends gorilla, and just go, all right, take out gorilla, done. Until somebody comes over, yeah, but me and our friends are still, I don't know, something else. Crocodiles, okay, we'll take out crocodiles as well. That's not the way it should work. We need to figure out a different way to do these sort of things. And the idea is that I would love to see you as the upcoming generation, the people that can produce change, to first of all be aware of these issues, have the necessary literacy to counter them, know how these things work, not at the level of the data scientist, but you need to be able to say, haha, you said bias, I know what you mean, it's not what I'm saying a different thing. We're not talking functions, we're not talking code, we're talking about the premises of this, and the fact that you can't really do universal inclusion. It doesn't exist. We don't have it in the world, we can't have it in AI. And that is important to understand, because if I work with an American company, I know it's an American company, and I will make compromises over certain things in order to be able to work with them. Because we will have different views of the world anyway. And this is how society works. It's very important for us to remember that, and to remember that artificial intelligence is a very strange new type of design material. Something that you use to make products and services and experiences. But it's weird. It's not like anything else, right? It's a thing that shapes some of the context in which you are, because it can change things around you, right? And has agency in the world, right? You can talk to ChatGPT. Midjourney can make pictures, right? And so on and so forth, and you have thousands of different things. Even if it's just a healthcare system that tells the doctors this X-ray is correct, is clear, this person is good, right? There is agency that your word processor or your Adobe Illustrator doesn't have. And it needs design attention, but not at the end of the process, not when they want us to be there, but before, to kind of reassess a little what is happening over there. It's a material that affects everybody's future. It has enormous implications and enormous consequences that, if untreated, risk getting us in very, very bad places along the way. Because then, if it's done, it's done. You don't really have anything to do. So I will part ways with you with not even a quiz, but we had the berries before, right? So you can see two animals over there, and you have a question mark, right, on the side. And I will show you 4 things like in the TV quizzes. I will not ask you what you think. I will tell you that if you choose anything that is not D, you're making a big, big mistake. Because the answer of what goes in there is not a 3-legged black and white fish. It's not what the hell is this thing? Why do you ask me stupid questions? This makes no sense. And it's not anything like you see in ImageNet, right? With labels that were just made up. It may be many, many different things, depending on the context and the use and what we have to do. So it can only be, it depends. You need to tell me more. We need to figure it out. Is it going to be really a fish? Maybe, but it might be something else entirely. And there is no right or wrong, and there is no way for us to do anything before we are able to answer that question. So this is it. I would just close with this thing that is supposed to be uplifting at a conference in terms of like, we don't really want to leave this to the engineers, right? I'm talking to designers, so that's why I'm trying to get them on my side with that. But the idea is that engage, right? The idea is that the only way to make it better is by not letting it go, but we need to engage and change it. This is all I have to tell you, but I wanted to also point out to this very, very interesting website that you might already know. If you do, forget it. If you don't, just go and take a look at exposing.ai, and you will see lots of the systems that are currently on the market explained in terms of how open they are. How do we know if they did ethical data collection? What was about the training they are using? And who is the company that is making money out of it? And what is the model that they are trying to use? And so on. It's very, very educative. So please just go and visit. This is all I have to tell you. There's a coda with books that you might want to read. I will not show them now because we are kind of like done. But I will give then the slides, so you will share them with you, and then you will, if you want, you can check a few books and be happy about your newfound knowledge over AI and information architecture. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andreas. I have a couple of questions. I suspect some of you do. Let's come back when the big hand is on the 6 and do a little bit of Q&A, and then I will tee you up for an experiment that you can either do in the room. It takes about a half hour, or my God, it's still so nice out. Perhaps you'll just grab the URL for the experiment and do it on your own in the next day or two or whatever. So let's come back when the big hand is on the 6. Let's ask Andreas some questions, and then let's do our work and get out of here.
空里面特别搞笑，自己后面就一堆。Yeah, that's